Hi, Sangeeta.
ನೀಟಾಗಿ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ಸೆಷನ್ ಫ್ರೀ ಇದೆ ನೋಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಅಂತ ಅಷ್ಟೇ.
Keep it on, don't put on there. It will make your life easy.
Hi, Ilaria.
So what
Hi,
happens?
good afternoon.
Afternoon to you.
Hello, it's Malcolm here.
Good evening to everyone else. This is Sandhya Rao, and I will hand over the session to Sangeeta Prasad, who's your moderator for the evening. But before that, I will briefly introduce all of you to this session, Reimagining Cities in the New Normal. And since all of you are so accomplished, I would not wish to read out all your biographies. It would take a long, long time. I'm going to briefly introduce Sangeeta. Sangeeta is the business strategist and a thought leader in urban spaces. She's the former MD and CEO of Mahindra Life Spaces. We have, welcome Sangeeta. We have Mr. Karthikeyan Natarajan, who's the president and COO Cyient. Mr. Anirban Ghosh hasn't joined us yet. He's a Chief Sustainability Officer of Mahindra Group. Mr. Malcolm Smith, an architect and founding director of the Integrated City Planning team at Arup, London. Did I get that right?
You did. Thank you very
Welcome.
much.
Thank you. And Ms. Ilaria Benushi, Director and Head of Construction and Real Estate, CDC Investment Works. Thank you for being here today. Sangeeta, I will come in. We have Mr. Anirban Ghosh who's joined us. I will come in 5 minutes before end of session and announce the awards. So it is over to you to take this forward. Thank you once again for being here. You are muted, Sangeeta. Unmute yourself.
Yes, between the mute and unmute and the virtual and the real, one tends to get confused. So thank you, Sandhya, for introducing all of us. And thank you, my friends. I am so privileged that you all have joined me in this session, which is about reimagining cities in the new normal. But before I start, I just wanted to keep you informed. Dr. Mathur has had a family emergency and he has not been able to join. He's called me and he's extremely sorry, but I think family emergencies and family comes much before anything else. So before we start on, so you know what is interesting for me? That this panel is of diverse people and diverse perspectives. But what is common is I know all of you. So there is a camaraderie, there is a familiarity. What I think we should intend to do in this session of reimagining cities in the new normal is to get those diverse perspectives and at the end of the session, create a coherent way forward, because that's what the world is all about moving forward. As I was researching on this subject, I realized that health, innovation, and calamities are very, very visibly intertwined. So whether it is the 14th century bubonic plague, which led to open spaces redesign, whether it is in the 17th century, the other natural and health calamities, which led to land use planning, which led to hierarchy of land use, I was thrilled and fascinated that we who sit here in the 21st century think we are going into the new normal. The world has seen many new normals. And the key factors has been innovation, health, and adversity. Whether it is the land use reforms, whether it is how do you plan your sewage and drainage systems, health reforms, all has been in the making for centuries in this world. And I can say with humility, humankind has always strived to work and find solutions for itself and its microcosm around it. With that context, what we would like to do today, friends, is to talk about how does spatial design, how does technology, how does sustainability, and more importantly, how does it get all together with funding and create a way forward for all of us as we work, play, live, learn in this wonderful and difficult time. Wonderful because we had never ever imagined it, and difficult because we are learning new things every day. So I will move over to my dear friend Malcolm, the founder of Master Planning and Urban Planning and Arup Consultants. We have had many sessions together, Malcolm, on redesigning, redefining cities, and we have done some work together. So how do you see this new normal? Do you see this having a defined period? Do you see this having multiple scenarios? What are the key things you see in this new normal as you step back and through your experience and expertise? Malcolm, over to you.
Sangeeta, thank you very much. And it's delightful to be joining you again and to be joining virtually. A little story about, maybe to start with, about the virtual world in which we live. I was very lucky to be invited to go to BMW in Munich and talk to them about making cars of the future. And we talked about many things as a city maker. And one of the things that stuck in my mind was they said to me, Malcolm, we are on the cusp of a generation where the physical equals the virtual. And I don't think until the last 6 months have I realized how close we've come to that. So I'm delighted to be with you this morning and this afternoon and this evening around the world. I guess I think about the challenge, Sangeeta, that we have in front of us of the new normal. And as an architect, designing new urban environments, from the scale of major new cities through to urban precincts, the challenges of that, I guess I'm thinking we might be asking the wrong question. It's very easy to look back, as you just did, and to look at different times and the technology that wrapped around an incident and the way in which humankind's innovation and motivation responded and produces a new outcome. But that's looking backwards. I think there is a different challenge as we look forward to plan places, because I don't think there is a new normal. I think there are many new normals. There are many possible futures. And look, as an architect who loves the kind of beauty of our spatial environments that come forward, we have to have a slightly different view when we plan and master plan. What do I mean by that? I think many futures recognizes that we have many options of the ways in which events affect our lives. So we can have events that disrupt us, like the, terrible pandemic that we're in at the moment. There are events which we plan, great cultural events, annual celebrations. But it's interesting that they all sit over the top of our normal lives, our normal places. And so we've been developing a bit of an idea that talks about this notion of fit for many futures. And what do I mean by that? It means that in one way, as human beings, that we share needs of light, air, clean water, our response to disease, of common denominators. Let's say there's a fixed framework of human existence that we need to survive in. But as we all sit here around the world, we sit in different contexts. We sit in different cultural contexts, in different economic contexts. We sit in different climatic contexts that challenge us. So what we begin to think about, that when we plan places and we address some of these challenges, is there's a fixed framework of those common denominators. But then there is a number of overlays that droop over our places in which we live. Some we don't see coming. Some have small impacts. Some have large impacts. Some we predict. And we talk about that as urban overlay. And I think that the challenge that it really sits inside of us at the moment is that we need to really understand that we have to stop trying to plan for that single vision, that we need a much more broad understanding. What are the priorities of particular places. Some of them we share as humanity on the earth, climate change and some of those impacts. Some are very particular to our place. We're increasingly saying we have to stop master planning and we have to start multi-planning. What are the range of scenarios that a good place can demonstrate? Now, to finish off, and then I hand over to our other much more interesting speakers, I think this weaves in a very important part of our digital world, because the digital format and structures that we now exist in this generation allows us to test scenarios. We can model environments, we can test a pandemic, we can test flood levels, we can test climate impacts, not perfectly, but along a system that allows us to plan. I hope that if that ability of our digital infrastructure to multi-plan, to have a range of scenarios that allows us to make our human settlements not just fit for a new normal, but fit for many new normals. So fit for many futures is what I would like to throw onto the discussion now. Sangeeta.
Malcolm, I always knew you will have such a situation, fit for many futures. You're so true, because I remember when we were working together on a project, I remember the most important words which came to our principles were flexibility, were humility, and evolving. So absolutely. I think whichever normal we are in, the future cannot be insular and binary. And I think that's a very good take. So but you are after all a planner, but we are practitioners, and we have to take the world forward, the usual conundrum between a Malcolm and a Sangeeta. So I will move over to Anirban. Anirban is the true mix of a planner and a practitioner. He heads sustainability in Mahindra Group, which is committed to sustainability commitments across the world. But he has also been a practitioner. So Anirban, how do you make a world fit for many futures as you, as a practitioner, have to create futures and make them implementable? How do you make it like the background of Malcolm, which is full of people? True, or is the world going to be like that? Anirban, how does a practitioner make the world fit for many futures? How do you choose? What's the framework? I know in Mahindras we have a framework. So over to you, Anirban.
Thank you, Sangeeta. In fact, this is probably $1 million question. What's the future going to be like? What is this? How is this disruption going to shape the future for us? What will we continue to do? And what will we do differently? And what will we not do? I don't think the answers for all these questions are completely in yet. It's a process of discovery. But let me share with you an experience I had over the last 2 or 3 hours. After 4 months, I actually met a friend, not on the computer screen, but physically in a public space. And in that public space, I saw some other people who were probably as fed up of being cooped up as I was, coming out to experience the openness. It told me that here is something that's not going to change. People will want to socialize and people will want to be in common open spaces. However, the conversation I had with my friend, who's an entrepreneur and runs his own advertising agency, led us to talking about the office he has, the rent he pays, and why an office of that size is not good enough for him anymore. And in his conversation with his landlord, the realization that many businesses are going to downsize in terms of space, which means in the future, there will probably be a surf feet of commercial space as people downsize. Now, this is an existing city. If we were to create a new city or reimagine a city, clearly we would have to reimagine workspaces and the amount of space we would provide for one individual work, or let's say for an office of 50 people, because not all 50 people may be there in the office together. It's not something that we plan for today, but clearly it is something that we will have to plan for tomorrow. So there are many such pointers that are coming as to what the future is likely to be. Now, before we go further, one of the things that this disruption has allowed us to do is introspect on things which we really didn't introspect on before. Because things were happening in an ecosystem, we were rolling along, we were fitting in, we were doing whatever we thought was right. And we didn't ever think of completely re-engineering the ecosystem, but we've got an opportunity now. So if we want to reflect and think, what is a city really? I know there are plenty of definitions that exist, but here is a COVID-induced definition, shall we say. So this is what occurs to me, that a city is an ecosystem created by the scale effects of lots of people who live, work, and play together. Now, they all live, work, and play together in a particular way, and we create spaces so that they are able to live, work, and play together properly. And in our minds, those things done in a sustainable manner with green buildings and affordable housing and proper transportation, etc., would probably lead to more sustainable cities of the future. In fact, most of the literature indicates that if we were able to create a transit-oriented development with mixed use and green buildings and affordable housing, etc., we would create a great new city for the future. But here comes COVID, and it introduces 2 or 3 very interesting things. It introduces hygiene, and it introduces immunity, and it introduces the possibility of a clean environment, and says, you know, if you want to reimagine a city for the future, you have to keep these things in mind in addition to what you were talking about before. And maybe if people are not going to travel to work, then the extent of transit-oriented design can be modified from what we were thinking about before. Given these thoughts, in fact, Sangeeta, you mentioned health, innovation, and calamities. If you take just the first letters, you get HIC. The variables that are coming up are also HIC, which is hygiene, immunity, and clean environment. And I don't want to go into the fact that HIC is also associated with some less essential matters, shall we say. But if we look at the future of cities this way and want to create a model that guides us in that direction, let me see if I can share with you the diagram that had emerged from the discussion on sustainable cities that we've had within the Mahendra Group. So I'm going to try and share that screen. And let me just see, let me know if you can see it. Can you see the diagram? Good. I'm hoping the words are legible and that you can see in the foundation of the house of sustainable cities, shall we say, phrases like adaptive infrastructure. And even as Malcolm was speaking about multiple realities and flexibility and so on, I was thinking, how did we even use this word adaptive in front of infrastructure when we were creating this model some 3 or 4 years ago? Clearly, there were some signs that one size would not fit all, even before things like COVID happened. So necessarily the future will have to be one where infrastructure would have to be adaptive. We use the word joyful for life spaces and abundant for livelihoods. I suppose if we were to create this model today, we would have to bring in the word safe and not let it be subsumed by the other words at some place, let's say within vibrant communities. Yes, we know that a community cannot be vibrant if it is not safe, but given the experience that we've had now, we'd probably modify it to safe and vibrant communities. But everything said and done, I still think that the thought that we had put behind this model of sustainable urbanization in large aspects still holds and reflects the conversation that we are having today and can shape the idea or reimagine the idea of a sustainable city of the future. Let me leave it at that for now. I'm sure we'll get very many interesting comments and go deeper into the conversation. I'll stop sharing my screen now. But I have to first figure out how to do it. There we go. You're on mute, Sangeeta. We can't hear you.
I mentioned that was a good backdrop to have anyway. And again, I'm getting a sense of deja vu of how, when we were building our Mahindra World cities, you know, the thing of, again, I'll repeat, of evolution, of resilience, of mundane things people talk about, of utilities, of your drainage system, are so the what is within is, I think, sometimes more important than what is without. And you raised a very interesting aspect of the socio-cultural dimension. We as human beings are always wanting to interact. And I can see that you're looking smarter and better today, because you wanted to make that effort to go out and meet your friend after a while, and you didn't want to look bad. So Anirban, I can sense that that is what does to us when we want to interact with people. And so we cannot have a world, again, going back to my hypothesis of a binary world. The world can never be binary because there are diverse people, diverse cultures, diverse aspects. So the one thing which you also raised was the aspect of how do I bring in various parameters of adaptability, agility. And I will again fight for my cause of not only safety, I think health also should not get subsumed in safety. Because sometimes in the mundane world, safety is related to certain other things. You know, it's accident, it is about safe work environment. So health is kind of becoming overwhelmingly prominent. So it's a complex situation. How do we break it into small parts and provide solutions and practices and conduct for a better future? And technology becomes a great enabler in that. And I personally believe technology cannot be a tool. It has to be mainstream. And Karthik, you have been doing work on smart cities. How do you think the whole definition of smart cities, the way we have seen it, does it undergo a change? Or what do you do now to see how to embed and enable cities by using technology for governance, using technology for spatial dimensions? How do you, for health, for infrastructure? The world is your oyster, Karthik. You have many opportunities. So if you want to choose a couple of them and delve into it, so be it. How does technology become not an enabler, but gets embedded into the way we conduct life for a better future? Karthik, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Sangeeta. First of all, thanks to invite me to be part of this panel. I'm really excited to share some of my perspectives. And having seen what has changed in the last 20 years, or what is going to happen for the next 30 years, I think the more you think of it, the more you realize saying that few things are not likely to change. For example, increased pace of urbanization and aging population. And I think some of these challenges, the security challenges, safety issues, whether it is biowar, somebody was talking about earlier in the panels. So all these are going to really increase the threat, increase the challenges that we are going to live in, and that's not going away. And having said that, if you also look at how do you balance the societal challenges, the environmental challenges, and the resources availability for the cities to manage. And this brings us with 3 or 4 key priorities for us to look at it. I think one, urban planning is getting mainstream. And I agree with what Malcolm said. It is not about one scenario, it is about multi-scenario. And the second thing, the quality of life, I think it comes back to the center of the cities. And the third important thing, I would definitely talk about the economic activity. I just want to quote some of the statistics. If you look at the impact of this pandemic, I think it has hit probably more on the urban cities than the rural part of the world, even if you take any country. And the impact is estimated to be about $10 to $15 trillion. I'm assuming that there will be a vaccine and things will probably stabilize in the next 6 to 12 months. But it has already made an impact of 10, $12 trillion. And people always ask the question, where is the money to invest on smart cities? How do you think we really need to make the right investments? What is the return of investments? I think it is right here, right? And when you really look at it, the cities have to really mature itself to manage all the calamities, and they need to be pandemic proof. They need to be any disaster proof. And you can't try to keep saying that if there is an issue, there is a floods, or if there is a hurricane and the city or state is down by a few days and you lose billions of dollars in economic activity. I think that cannot be the case for the future. And what it really means is we need to start thinking of, if you take 2050 versus what we are today, there are at least about 2 billion people who are living in the urban cities are likely to grow to 6 billion. That means we are going to triple in the next 30 years in terms of people who are going to live in the urban cities. I think it comes back to what I would really call it as 5 S's, bringing the cities to be smart and safe, secured, sustainable, and bring speed or agility to anything that you're doing. I think the cities have to be faster than its own growth. If they are going to lag behind, I think there will always be a catch-up game. And the biggest opportunity of common denominator, leaving the cultural issues across the world, across the countries and the population that we are going to cover, I think the common denominator has to be technology infrastructure. I think digital comes to the mainstream, and the only way by which all of them could really agree on to a common theme is to really have more importance, emphasis on the technology infrastructure. And as I start seeing that more cities are distributed in terms of there are 50 to 100 departments which are running on their own, I think they all need to integrate into serving or improving the quality of life. And the e-governance gets much more precedence. It doesn't matter in many states or countries who's running the federal government or who's running the state government, who's running the city government. I think it comes down to the cities more than the state or central, right? And if you take any states, probably more than 30, 40, 50% of the population live in the urban cities. So it is not so much about the state government, but it is about the city government, city councils. I think they get mainstream. What I would really propose is to look at standardizing the technology architecture and trying to integrate all e-governance and anything to do with the citizen-centric services that are being provided, and also bring the role of data analytics and artificial intelligence, and making sure how all of them will have a key role to play. Whether you are trying to look at an intelligent traffic management system or integrated health management system or air quality system, I think they're all integrated. You can't try to say that my air quality doesn't affect the health of the citizens, or my pollutions and congestion I have in the cities do not affect the health of my citizens. I think it requires an integrated approach. And what is going to change due to the current pandemic? I see at least 2 or 3 additional scenarios to Malcolm's point to get added to what we already know. I think the urban spaces, especially for commercials, are going to come down, and which means this is going to put new challenge in terms of how the spaces need to be managed. We are thinking of hub and spoke model. Many of the IT services companies are looking at, I don't want one large campus where I put 10,000, 20,000 engineers. Can I put a campus of 2,000 people and then set up about 20 centers around the city of 100, 200 people? So how do you think these hub and spoke models will work? Now, what does it mean in terms of the city infrastructure or city planning? If you look, take the example of utilities. This is from one of the customer that we invited for a panel from London. He said in the last 2 months, they've seen that 15% increase in the electricity demand from the residential area and 30% reduction from the commercial area in the last 3 months. They are not prepared for it. And now their whole utility infrastructure is set up such a way that you can consume it from where you're producing, and infrastructure cannot really cater the other way. Suddenly there is an increase in one area and decrease in another area. It is still not software defined utilities yet, that you can actually switch some switches and make the whole change happen. I think, how do you think you are going to provide for some of the changing scenarios that are coming up? How do you make sure that your technology backbone is going to be very critical and integrated, and it is really going to look at multiple ways of connecting all the dots and be able to provide an integrated e-governance stroke citizen-centric services? I think that is going to be the future that we really need to aim for and get our action together. As I said, speed is going to be of essence. We can't really wait for the cities to get into a lot of issues and then we trying to catch up with what has already changed.
So Karthik actually brought a lot of very important facets into this dialogue. Smart, safe, secure, sustainable, and speedy. Now, there are multiple variants and multiple ways we can do it, but I think a very important point which came about was the integration of a city system as well as empowerment of city governance. Because the more it goes above, and we've seen that during this pandemic, Karthik, in our country, and I'm sure in other countries, while there have been some architecture at the state and central level, ultimately it's the local level which is governing the dynamic of their ecosystem, because each local has different kinds of socio-economic human segments. So the needs of those people are different. So it would be foolhardy to design something which is fit for one geography or fit for a large ecosystem. And that's coming through, and it has been a very, very important insight. Many of us as business people, as practitioners, as thinkers have seen that happening in front of our eyes, the shift changing, that while there are government orders at a central level, it's the municipality which is determining what will happen at their circumstances, at their small area. So as we talk about shift of the way of governance, as we talk about artificial intelligence and switching tariff, you brought another important point, that if industry versus residential, there are shifts. What happens to utilities and infrastructure, and what happens to the tariff for that? So do you have a uniform tariff structure, or do you have technology which kind of helps you to shift from one to the other? These are very potent and pertinent questions. With all this can only happen if there's money to be spent to do all this. Multiple variables. If you are seeing that so many things are happening, and you have a dashboard or a business model or a business case which you do in your investments, what do you see will remain unchanged, and what will you see as changing as we move into the future while you are evaluating projects from the urban centers?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be in such panel, and I would immediately say sorry for being rather basic, because you're all visionaries, right? You see new cities and the new normal, the new futures. I like Malcolm when you say that there's not one future, there are many level of futures that we will be probably facing. And I'm basic because whatever we think we want to do, or with whatever it is that we want to imagine, that needs to be sustainable from a financial point of view as well. And so ideas that are not then executable because not sustainable and will not attract also private money, not just the public money, I don't think they have a great future. So first of all, I would like to say that it's quite early, I think, to say what would fundamentally change. We are, as you know, the CDC is the developmental financial institution of the British government, and therefore our investments in real estate provide what we call social infrastructure. For example, one of the key pillars is housing, low-cost housing, affordable housing, which is an asset class, which is, everybody talk about it, but how do you do it? And how do you do it in this new context? And are the basics changed? And one big problem that we have is that this kind of real estate, which is part of, cities are made of this, have already their challenges because they address mid to bottom population. So you know that the margins are very limited to start with. So how much you can do on smart transport, green spaces, new connectivity, technology, when your margins are this big, actually this small. So I think that overall what I see changing is a growing intervention by integrated intervention with government and private money. So I think this really needs to work. And Kartik was talking before about an integrated approach with local authorities, because they need to be involved in planning, they need to be involved in land reforms, they need to be involved in permits. And I mean, and I think I see more and more of this. We are looking at a few things. This is not in India, it's more in Africa. And we're looking at regenerating precincts of cities. And obviously, one key part, one key role is the one of the local administration, but then it goes into the regional administration and then to the national administration. And so I think that we will, I hope actually, I really hope that we will see more of that, because I don't think that with the private money or government alone can actually even start thinking the ideas or executing the ideas that you all are putting forward, which I think are obviously what we need to do. And the other point is, when I say it's a bit early, as you know, a lot of the things that were sustainable, not financially sustainable, but ecologically sustainable, now there's a big question mark. I'll give you a basic example. I think about 90% of the hotels worldwide do have fixed windows, right? And that was the reason for that was safety. Now, that is not safety in a COVID environment, because you need fresh air. So what do? You start investing now and changing all the assets, the real estate that exist, the offices, the hotels, the housing. These are, I think that these are, for people like me, less ideas, more facts and intervention. These are the big questions right now. Shall we start already investing to prepare for an environment which would be prone to a situation like this? As in, let's be positive. I'm optimistic by nature. There will be a vaccine, okay, in 12 months, and we go back to some sort of no, I wouldn't call it normality, but is that a permanent situation that we will have to face going forward? And therefore, shall we start thinking now to reinvent also the actual real estate that we have and all the stock that exists? And that's, to me, that's the big question. And how do we make this sustainable? I don't know if there's an answer, but that's the question.
Ilaria, thank you. We are all ears, because without fund, no change is possible. And you mentioned very, very crisply and very rightly, it has to be sustainable in terms of what it offers to its clients and its stakeholders. It has to be executable, and it should be able to attract public as well as private money. So you mentioned also about public-private partnership, which in some form Kartik also mentioned about. And I think it's a very, very important element, because the social contract of public-private is also important. Otherwise, we will not be able to attract funds. What you also spoke about, which I think I will, as I go to the other panelists, I'll ask them to elaborate, is on the aspect of funding is all about, is the product prepared for future? You know, the Windows example. So it's not just about, you're a good brand, so I will invest in you. Are you good enough to envision what is the right product? Is the product going to look the same because you're a good brand and you think there are customers standing there to buy your product? No. Is it something which is suitable for the new normal? Because the new normal is here to stay. We have to be positive in the current circumstances. We cannot, while we cannot wish ourselves away and say everything will be hunky-dory from tomorrow. It will be a normal, but it will be a different normal. And we have to have different ways of looking at things. So these are the things I took out from your discussions, Ilaria, and I'm sure many others who are listening are quickly noting down, because if they have to face the new normal, they will need funds from people like you. So that brings me to something which is about the design aspect. People spoke about workspaces a lot. How will the commercial real estate be? Will they be larger? Will they be smaller? Will they house so many people? I do believe the world is not either or. The world is and. So as the workspaces have to be reshaped and refashioned, so are we seeing the home spaces. So are we seeing the recreational spaces. It's all a continuum and it is all integrated. A city is not about A or B. It is A, B, and C. And while we are talking about fit for the different futures, Malcolm, I'm going back to you and asking you your perspectives, because I sincerely believe that I cannot design workspaces of a different type if I'm not cognizant of how my home spaces will look, how my recreation spaces will look, because I, as a human being, will interact with all three spaces.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Malcolm, are the two key points which you would like to give to all of us in the audience as takeaways as we plan this integrated ecosystem?
Sangeeta, look, I was listening to Anirban very, very clearly. We did some research and we identified that there were 13 different environments pre-COVID that we worked in. 13. The one where we sit at a desk with a computer was about 15 to 17% of our time. The one that we actually make. And so I think this kind of diversity of work, but I wanted to take it to a slightly different angle to leave some thoughts. And it was what Alara and her hotel example raised with me. I think we need to avoid, I talk about the siren of COVID, in other words, being drawn to this single issue. And the hotel example is a very good thing. I think we have, despite the scale and impact that we are working through at the moment, we have greater challenges in front of us. We have the silent challenge of our environment and our planetary balance. And it is not as overt as COVID, but it is more fundamental. And because it doesn't have a direct impact, we still need to challenge that. And so I think we have to think about systems in a more circular way. You know, the openable window of the hotel, the multiple environments of workplace, you know, projects we're doing in Sydney, where 40% to 50% of the time of the workforce is spent outside. So we produce shaded environments that are slightly cooled, that aren't a desk. So we have to be much cleverer. But I think I almost kind of want to finish with Karathan's kind of point on digital disruption and implementation. We are doing a project at the moment for the Human Genome Research Campus near Cambridge. And we were talking to the scientists about what is the place where they do this amazing genomics research, discovery science. You would have thought it would have been a cool coffee shop and they're all sitting down next to each other. And sometimes what became very evident, it was the quiet, what they called the wandering spaces. I often talk about the nice analogy that when Newton discovers gravity, he's not sitting at a coffee shop, he's sitting under an apple tree, reflecting. And the digital world, if you ask what is digital doing, digital is very good at automating what is commoditized. If we can repeat it, a computer can process it. Karathan, that sells it totally short. It's much more sophisticated. But take that premise. It asks the question, what does it leave behind for us to do for work? And what it leaves behind is innovation and thinking. And Sangeeta, it goes back to your point, what is innovation? And the physical environments of innovation, the reason why I put our beautiful Broadgate Arena behind me is it is going to be the casual place. The informal wandering is going to play an increasing role. It has an alignment with well-being, of being outside, of not being inside industrialized systems. So I think the notion of the kind of wandering space of a creative innovation, you know, work environment is coming forward. But we cannot be distracted by the challenge that's in front of us in the short term of COVID. The greater challenge is to rebalance. I think I will be slightly radical. I think we have to go past the word sustainability. To sustain is to hold the current position. Our current position is not sustainable. We have to be restorative. We have to find new ways of making our places to be better, not status quo. So Sangeeta, around workplace, it's something about innovation, clever environments, restorative systems. And I would think that hopefully when we do clever buildings and places, they are no longer lineal things that we use, destroy, but we almost go back to many of our pre-industrial histories and they become circular. A building is a house. One day it is a hospital, the next, it is an office, the next, because it breathes, it has scale, and it has a humanness about it. So there's a few thoughts on workplace.
Malcolm, very, very evocative. And I'm just wondering, is it fitting Ilaria's dashboard of our investments? That's the only comment I have on this. But I wanted to mention key things which you mentioned. And you're right. While you spoke about the wandering spaces for the genome and the high-end research, it has become wandering now. A hotel is being converted into an isolation center, at least in our country, because we have paucity of space. So it's auditorium has been converted into a hospital, so.
Sangeeta, there's a beautiful example of the high-speed trains in France being fitted out as hospitals.
Yes.
So we have to think not only of our buildings, but of our infrastructure as these agile systems. So it's,
so what, containers, in fact, containers have been used. So it is obvious, again, I go back to my hypothesis of workspaces, life spaces, recreation spaces are not insular. They need to work together at one go, because there are enough overlays, and those overlays have to be taken into account, but put in a dashboard which Ilaria is willing to invest in. Otherwise, none of these will work. And
very true.
About talking about the spaces.
So nothing will happen without me, basically.
You are
I'm delighted and honored.
Whatever we do, you have to finance. So we have to just Ilaria.
Single-handedly.
Ilaria, we have to prove to you that it's a good investment.
Exactly.
Yes. And we will get public and private both together.
Very good.
Back to this, we were speaking of spaces. We were speaking about spatial. What happens when one has to go from one space to the other? And that's why I go back to Anirban again. How does transportation and the impact, because I do not see transportation again as something separate. It is integrated to my workspaces, my home spaces, and my recreation spaces. Do you see the whole impact of transportation? That's my first, and I have a second one for you. I've discussed this with you personally. Today, ironically, the sky is very blue. The birds are flying. The water is blue. The plants are green. Why are we unhappy? Why are we scared? So what's happened? What's this dichotomy? So the first one is, how does transportation play a role? And I will also request Karthik to give his views from the technology aspect of transportation spaces a little later. But yes, Anirban, over to you.
Thank you. I still remember the compliments you showered on me on the way I'm looking today. I will tell my barber he's done a wonderful job. Such compliments don't usually come by. So let me get down to your question on transportation. In fact, the conversation on transportation, the roots, like what Karthik said in his first intervention. If workspaces are going to get distributed, that people from an office will work from many different locations, what is a city going to be like and what sort of transportation will it need? Actually, Sangeeta, you and I both live in Bombay. You may remember that in recent times, our transportation company did something radical. It brought down the fares sharply and it replaced its large buses with small ones. And in a short period of time, started doing better financially. And that's because in Bombay, we used to have one business district. We have many more business districts now. So instead of people going from one end of the city to work at the other end of the city, they were going from different parts of the city to different parts of the city. So we needed to reconfigure transportation. Interestingly, that model is extremely suitable for a more flexible space, a space where people are working and living in different places, where you don't need one large bus or one long train taking lots of people from one end to another, but you need smaller units taking people crisscross in various parts of the city. So in a sense, BEST has actually done some sort of a pilot, shall we say, here in Mumbai, something that can increase in time over future. I just happen to have a bus depot right beside my apartment block, and I see these little buses coming in and out, and see what a wonderful job they're doing in terms of being able to take people around, even in these COVID constrained times. Let me move on to the second part of your question. And Malcolm has already talked about it really, that if there is one lesson we've learned from COVID, it's that we are living beyond natural boundaries, and the earth is complaining in different ways. COVID is not the first. We've had SARS, MERS, Ebola, etc. It is probably not the last. We'll have something later. And it is not the only way in which the earth is complaining. The earth is complaining through extreme weather events, through earthquakes, through hurricanes, and so on. Very recently, there was an article published which says that during the lockdown, the earth is actually shaking a lot less. Seismologists and geologists are writing about this. So there are so many of us going around in cars and vehicles. I don't think we even realize what sort of impact we're having on the earth. And I don't think we consciously know how many ways are we crossing natural boundaries in living what we think is a normal life. So very clearly, we need to recreate our spaces and our way of living in which, so that we are living within natural boundaries and are creating a sustainable planet for the future, for better living for us human beings. Actually, if we end up creating, let's say, a COVID compatible world, we would have done ourselves a big disservice, because we will be able to deal with COVID. But we must ask the question, what else is likely to happen? And if there is one thing that we know is likely to happen, is the impact of climate change and everything that we are doing, which is resulting in us being beyond natural boundaries and the way in which the earth is hitting back at us. So we should not stop at looking at the world only from a limited COVID lens, but should ask the question, how do we make the world more resilient for a future in which there are some things we know which are going to happen. There are some we don't, we can't deal with that, but start thinking what else can possibly happen. Within COVID, we've discovered the wonders of technology. Actually, we were using technology to deal with efficiency, transparency, corruption, governance already. We find that it has other wonderful benefits. It will become hygiene, but we'll have to go beyond that and see, in a world where technology is hygiene, what else do we need to make it more sustainable in the future?
So yes, I know we have had this conversation, Anirban, that the word which is shouting out to me from this conversation is the word integrated. Whether it is integration of spaces, whether it is integration of way we do design, spaces and transportation, and also integration of governance, which Karthik and Ilana spoke about, as well as empowerment. So it's a very, very fine balance between integrating, but don't integrate and aggregate. Integrate, but don't get it at the top of the pyramid. Integrate at different levels. And I know the WEF organizers are kind of knocking at my door and saying, Sangeeta, I think you want to continue this conversation forever. So what I would like to do is, and that's why I'm getting back to some of the key elements which we discussed today, because I think it's important for all of us to leave some takeaways for the audience as well as each of us, because I think this 1 hour session has been learning from each other, learning for each other. So it's important. So one is, how do we think about design, not insularly, but holistically? How do we think of design not being standard and constant, but also depending on where we are, the socio-cultural context, the context of that place, so from the wandering to the coffee shop, all coexist amicably and happily. But we should be selective and aware what we are doing. We should not give the wandering to the coffee shop and the coffee shop to the wandering. Once in a while is fine, but not always. The other thing which came about is, as we are redesigning, we do not redesign for one variable and get overwhelmed and bogged down by one. The world is just not about COVID. There has been a journey which we are all going through. Maybe some tweaking has to be done, and maybe a veritable tweaking has to be done, and that has to be done in such a way that we can face the future better. But I think as I go back, and how do we do all that? How do we use technology in the mainstream and not just as a tool and tackle and put it in the third layer and say, you know what, Karthik, I have got all sorted out. You just put the technology in place. No, technology is actually when the business model and the designing and everything is happening. It is from the formative stage. That's what I understood from this conversation. We tend to dismiss technology to the last layer. No, that's not the thing which we want to do. With all that, I will just say, I go back to one of the wonderful songs by one of my favorite singers. I hope the world becomes a wonderful world, and the grass will be green, the sky will be blue, and we will be healthy and safe. So, Mr. Armstrong, we will remember your song. What a wonderful world, because we as humankind, it's our duty and responsibility to respond to nature. We have done enough ravaging of nature, and do things with humility, perseverance, and resilience. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And Ilaria, we are going to do everything so that you fund us. Thank you. Over to you, Sandeep.
Very pleased to hear that.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Such an inspiring session and such great learning from this session. Such a privilege to be here. And one more privilege is, on behalf of WEF 2020, I get to confer the awards on all these esteemed speakers. This award is for leaders who are pioneers in their professional endeavors with distinctive voice and vision, and with such expertise and spirit that they continue to inspire the next wave of empowered leadership. So once again, it is my privilege to confer the Iconic Leader Creating a Better World for All award on Mr. Karthikeyan Natarajan, Mr. Anirban Ghosh, Mr. Malcolm Smith, Ms. Ilaria Benucci, Ms. Sangeeta Prasad, and Dr. Ajay Mathur, who unfortunately could not be with us today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This award will be sent to you by email, a soft copy, because we cannot obviously at the moment send it by a physical copy. You should get it within a week or two. Thank you once again. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandhya.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best webinar ever.
Thanks, Sangeeta. Thanks, Sandhya. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.